Hashrate is sponsored by BAMP.FI's NUSD. NUSD is the Bitcoin dollar. Now you can hold dollars directly in your Bitcoin wallet on the Bitcoin chain. Swap between native Bitcoin and NUSD using just a Bitcoin wallet. No bridges, wrap coins, or centralized exchanges required. On the BAMP.FI website, you can swap NUSD with Tether and Athena's USDE, so there are easy ways in and out for you Ethereum people. NUSD is already supported by major Bitcoin DeFi protocols like DotSwap, and more added every day. Go to BAMP.FI to start your NUSD journey today. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Hashrate. My name is Mark Jeffrey. My guest today is Zach Vorhies, otherwise known as the Google Whistleblower. Hello, Zach. How you doing, man?
Hey, Mark. Good to be here. Thanks, you for having me on your show.
Thank you for coming on at such short notice. So we're here today to chat all about the CrowdStrike outage. You did what I thought was an excellent technical analysis of what happened, and I want to kind of go through it with you and break it down as much as we can for normies. And my background is I was a software engineer in the 80s and most of the 90s, and I haven't really coded since then. But my bread and butter was C and C++. So I could follow along with what you were saying, but I just want to make sure everybody else can. So first of all, before we kind of get into all that, what is CrowdStrike and why is it embedded in so many things?
Yeah, so CrowdStrike is a security software. What it does is it injects itself almost like malware, but it bills itself as anti-malware, but it's everywhere. And it watches processes, injects itself into it, and then makes sure that their calls to the system are expected, and it's looking for patterns that indicate that there's a virus running. If it does detect that there's unusual activity, it will flag it and block the execution of the application. So that's what we're dealing with here. It's got privileged access to computers around the world. It's installed itself as a driver, which runs very close to, it's one of the most privileged things, but additionally, it's not just a regular driver. It's got boot start privileges, which means that you can't remove it. And if you do, your system will not boot. So that's the background on CrowdStrike and their Falcon product, which is the center of attention for this latest outage.
So when you say privileged, for those who don't know this, so in order to create security software that is effective, it can't even trust the operating system itself because the operating system might be compromised. So you want to give it as much access to the very root, to the bare metal of the computer as much as possible so it doesn't have to trust anything else. It can verify everything else. So that's why it's got a backstage pass. It's got the highest possible privileges to anything, and that's why it's buried so deep inside of the operating system and all these companies and all these offerings all over the earth.
Right. Like normally boot start access is only granted to Microsoft drivers. But it's pretty exceptional that CrowdStrike also has this privilege with their, boot start drivers. So, and here's the issue, right? Like the fix involves not actually deleting the detonator. It involves removing the trigger, which is a data payload that they pushed out without consent, which they push out like 3 times a day with new data. But they did it with this, and this time it was bad and it took out a whole bunch of computers.
So, normally, like what this is supposed to do is it's supposed to be, you're updating the guard of your castle with new information and new defenses against possible attackers. And so they're always being updated with new information and new intelligence. So this is actually normally a good thing, except if it's a bad thing, in which case it's catastrophic, as we've just found out, right?
Right. So here's the problem, right? So what happens is that they're reading in data. That data is being interpreted as memory regions within the computer, and then those are being accessed. And what happened was that a bunch of these data files were being sent out, and they had 0 values in them. And what that meant to the driver is that I need to go look at the 0 memory region of the computer. That's always an invalid region for any program. And so when it attempts to access that memory region, you get a blue screen of death. Now, if this had happened in a normal application, what happens is that the operating system says, well, this is unprivileged code. It's running in an area that we can actually just terminate and continue on, right? So you'll get like, oh, this application is crashed, and then you hit close, and then you just launch it again. Well, this isn't what happens when you're in privileged driver code. When it does an error, the operating system, out of abundance of caution, decides that nothing else can go forward. And so it immediately halts the operating system, which is what you got here.
It kills itself.
Yes.
So normally if you're running an application like Excel or whatever, and there's an error, that the operating system just closes Excel and goes, okay, there was a problem there. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to kill that process, that program. But the operating system doesn't crash. Everything else, if you have Word open or whatever, it's fine.
Yeah.
And so
now, let me make an analogy. It's like if you're on an airplane, it's the difference between puking in aisle 7 and puking all over the cockpit. If you puke all over the cockpit, they got to ground the flight. They're not going to let it take off. They're going to have to do a sweep. They're going to have to make sure that everything's all right, because they have to make sure that the integrity of the airplane is intact and that the instrument panel is working as expected. If you puke in aisle 7, they're just going to remove you from the flight, and there may be a delay, but they'll continue on without any sort of major disruption. And that's what we got here. Once someone pukes in kernel space, which is what's called ring 0,
the cockpit, the kernel,
the cockpit. Then the operating system says, well, we can't trust anything after here, because this thing could have done some really nasty stuff. And so we're just going to halt the entire operating system.
So I want to talk for just a second about memory management, because as a programmer in the 80s and 90s dealing in C and C++, you can, basically you have access to all of the memory directly, the bare metal, as if you were programming an assembler, which is unusual here in the future because we've realized that kind of power is exceedingly dangerous. And something like, 50 to 80% of all bugs that I track down in my own code and other people's code boiled down to bad memory management of one kind or another. So back in those days, you can think of the memory of the computer as sort of like UPS boxes, right? So you have let's say there's 1,000 mailboxes in there, and each mailbox contains the variables that you're working with. So, you might, your instructions are something like take the contents of box 519, add it to the context of box 730, put the results into box 825, right? That's sort of what you're doing. And sometimes you perform arithmetic on the actual box numbers themselves. So you might say, take the context of the contents of box 100, add it to box 101, put the result in whatever the contents of box 508 and 633 are, and that's the mailbox address that you should put the result in. And so that kind of pointer and the address of the mailbox we call pointers, that kind of pointer arithmetic is also something people would do. And some of the kind of brainiac programmers would try to be very clever and create all kinds of labyrinths of pointer arithmetic. And some of it was just them showing off. Some of that was them creating job security. So they would obfuscate on purpose in order so only they could read their code and understand it. But that's sort of what we were dealing with in the 80s and 90s and the way C and C++ operates today. Did I get that right, Zach?
Yeah, but there's also another thing, which is that a lot of these APIs that Windows uses to, where the functions are located are actually at known stable addresses. And so a lot of the times what's happening with this, what I believe is happening with this is it's reading in a table of data. Those data refer to memory offsets. Those memory offsets are expected to exist because they're supposed to be stable. And so then it goes and tries to access those data structures that are, always going to be known. Because normally when you get a pointer, you don't actually know where the memory is going to end up. It all has to do with what the memory manager is doing at the time, what the state of it is when you launch that program. So sometimes you'll get different memory regions depending on how the memory mapper is allocating things into your process. And so this whole idea that you have a stable address is not really applicable for most applications. And so the fact that they're actually getting a number, determining that it's, a memory address and then grabbing that value directly doesn't usually make a lot of sense for almost any type of application unless you're trying to hook into the operating system and inject your code. And that's what it seems like they're doing here. The CrowdStrike technical reports that they're trying to look for named pipes, which is how processes communicate to each other. But the issue is that they don't actually talk about the root cause. They talk about sort of the higher level thing of what they're doing. The root cause is actually very direct. And luckily, we've got the stack trace of it, like right here. And what it's doing right here is trying to read memory region 9C, which translates into decimal notation as 156, right?
So you might think of this as mailbox 156 in the UPS.
Right, but
correct?
Yeah, but that's in the null region, right? Like that whole block of code that exists. It's, I think it's 4 to 16K depending on the memory set page. That should never exist, and I think it's like a whole region.
So those are mailboxes that don't exist, or they can never be accessed.
And so what's happening is that they're loading this data file. They're getting an instruction that there's data at this 9C location. So they're trying to access it. And then what happens is that this exception gets generated. The OS says attempt to read from address 9C. That always is a null pointer exception is what we call it. In a normal application, this is not fatal to the operating system, is fatal to the program. It has to immediately terminate. We're in protected mode or in a privileged mode. Therefore, the whole operating system crashes and it gets into this endless boot loop where it continually tries to access the same information over and over and over again. There's nothing there. It's an invalid access. The program crashes. The operating system halts.
So because of this, any machine worldwide, be they in an airlines or a bank or whatever, that crashes, this is why we see the blue screen of death. This right here is what caused it.
Okay. That's correct. And so the thing is that now when this whole thing originally started, we assumed that this was executable code that was updated, that they had delivered bad code onto all these machines. And so Microsoft actually got the finger up front saying, how could you let this happen? They said, this wasn't us. We didn't push any new executable code to anybody involving CrowdStrike. And so as people started to dig in, what they realized is that it was actually this driver was reading another file that was also called .sys, which would normally be a driver file, but it's actually not a driver file. It's actually a text file. They're reading in the data. They're grabbing, they're interpreting a number of numbers as being offsets within the memory system and then trying to dereference it. And the thing is that they update this like 3 times a day or something. They pushed out bad code. Now, because it wasn't actually code, it was data, that served as the trigger for this detonator. Data is usually considered to be benign. And because it's usually considered to be benign, because it's assumed that the code that, is ingesting that data is the one that has, a danger zone, you don't have to go through the same rigorous security reviews. In fact, as CrowdStrike says, they're pushing this thing 3 times a day and updating it, right? But this time, they happen to basically put out a bad data file, push it globally, and that's what we see right here. Now, here's the question, right? Look.
So let me actually. I just want to repeat what you said and sort of dumb it down as much as I can, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. So there was no check on the actual code because there was nothing wrong with the code that CrowdStrike pushed out. There is a data file that the code read from in order to get addresses and do certain things, and that is what was bad. And so it basically had bad data, but the code was fine. There was nothing wrong with the code.
The code's not fine either, right? Like the thing is that there should be like they're reading integers and assuming that it's valid address space, and they're accessing that. And what they should be doing in their code is basically checking to make sure that code has access privileges, right? Like you can go to the operating system and say, look, I've got this block, I've got this memory block, and I want to know whether I can access it or not, right? And you give that to the operating system, it's going to return true or false. And if it's true, that means you can access it. If it's false, it means if you access it, you're going to crash. They're not doing that.
Why not? That seems like a simple thing to do. Right? And I'm right about that. That struck me. It struck me as suspicious that this was even allowed to happen, that there weren't checks, error checks in place to make sure.
We actually have these error checks for code because this is a common problem. You don't want to raw dog read a pointer that may or may not point to valid memory in your program. Like you want to halt, you want to like basically issue a warning saying, we just tried to do something, and if you don't have that, then these automated code checking tools like Address Sanitizer, Thread Sanitizer, what have you, will flag it and say, oh, you've got an error here, and give you a report saying, these are the problems with your code. Like, CrowdStrike is not running this. And Microsoft has its own tool suite that runs on the compiled assembly code, and it's not being run on this either. And so this detonator that
why do you call it a detonator? Because
it blows up your computer when it's triggered. Okay. And it was sitting there installed on Mac, Linux, and Windows operating systems across the world. Now, here's the funny thing.
For how long? How long has it been there?
Since the inception of the Falcon product. It's a core feature of what the Falcon product does. They've never fixed this. They've never patched it. And by the way, the fix doesn't patch it either. The detonator is still lodged inside of all these computers, even when you take out the offending data file. All you do is remove the file that,
the trigger, but the capacity to explode is still there.
Right. And no one's trying to fix that, and they haven't issued anything about what they're going to do to make sure this is not going to happen again. In fact, I suspect that they're going to keep this backdoor in to all these computers so that when they need to cause a disruption, they can just push a data update.
Okay, so let me just recap. So it's in Microsoft operating systems. You said it was also in Mac and Unix operating systems as well.
That's correct.
So, and the range checks are not there. So in your view, this is not negligence, this is sabotage?
I thought it was negligence at the beginning. I think it's sabotage now. And here's the interesting thing. I bet a whole post about how this is a null pointer exception. I got 30 million impressions. Yeah. Right? This is almost 3 times my last biggest tweet, and which was 12 million. And that was like bigger than my previous, biggest tweet by, factor of 4, which is like, I think my highest tweet was 3 million. Then I got this 12 million. And then I got this 30 million retweet. And then guess what we find out today? There's credible rumor reports that Biden has slipped into a coma while under Secret Service custody. Mm-hmm. And that the letter that he sent announcing his resignation did not have the official letterhead. There was a signature mismatch. It looked like Biden was not going to cede control.
But what does this have to? What does this have to do with CrowdStrike?
CrowdStrike is a giant distraction that sucks all the oxygen out of the room. So we're talking about CrowdStrike. We're like, oh, how bad is CrowdStrike? And while we're doing that, no one's noticing that the deep state right now is doing a coup on Biden to take him out so that Kamala Harris can step in his place.
Okay. So you think this is CrowdStrike operating in concert with the deep state to provide a distraction cover for a coup to remove Biden, because we all know that Biden can't win.
Right, and that sounds almost far-fetched. That sounds so
it does a little bit, even to me. And I am open to these ideas, and I do think I tend to be with the all-in crowd, specifically like David Sachs and those folks. There is a deep state. There is fuckery afoot for sure. But I also want to be very careful in analyzing things like this. That there is a tendency to kind of get crazy.
Oh yeah. Guess what? So I brought the sauce.
I try to keep it first principles as much as I can. Right. So
ready for it. Okay. So here's evidence number 1. This isn't even the best. The second one's going to be even better. Okay. Ready for us? All right. So what happened was we had an insider sale. The chief security officer, Sean Henry, sells $1.5 million worth of CrowdStrike days before this whole event shakes down. CrowdStrike lost about a third of their value since this happened, maybe even a little bit more. Okay, but that's not even the most damning part about this. Look who this guy is. Okay, this is this letter about how he failed us, right? So maybe let's see if I can zoom in a little bit more. Oh, I can't. Thanks.
That's okay. We should be able to view this.
Okay. So on Friday,
I'll enhance this in the.
So he says, on Friday we failed you, and for that I'm deeply sorry. I've been in my professional life for 40 years, and blah 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 blah. Oh, and my North Star has always been to protect good people from bad things. Now listen to this. This next part, very important. For 24 years in the FBI, I was involved in hundreds of investigation and crisis terrorist incidents, mass shootings, computer intrusions, and kidnapping. This dude running the security software thing sold shares and was ex-FBI for 24 years. Are you freaking kidding me? They've got a Fed agent lodged in that's responsible for this data push.
But not all FBI people are evil. I do think there's some bad apples. I think we now know that for sure, especially at the top. But 80 to 90% of the rank and file of the FBI likely is okay, in my opinion. And I don't know anything. I'm just a guy guessing, like all of us. I do think the top of the FBI is extremely problematic and probably needs to be removed. But the fact that this guy was FBI, is that immediately damning? I'm not sure it is.
Look, I just had this whole thing with Project Veritas. They had this implosion, and then it was this Fed boy, Kyle Seraphin. Turned out to be a plant. He's been pretty exposed. So I've been dealing with this stuff myself. And he came out and tried to take down James O'Keefe right before he did the CIA bust. And so what I learned really quickly is that once you're FBI, you don't actually, a lot of these people that are like ex-FBI, they're not actually ex-FBI. They're actually, they're pretending to be ex-FBI, but they're actually continuing to work with the agency. Yeah. And as soon as I saw this, I went, oh my God, this is the exact same thing. This is a guy that was ex-FBI. And by the way, the Twitter files, the same thing. We got realized that all of these ex-FBI agents were littered throughout the company. I suspect that something similar has happened with YouTube. We haven't had the YouTube files yet with that disclosure, but the
Twitter files have definitively proved that the FBI is dirty and does fuck with the American population. Right. That much I'm 100% convinced of, and I think that's, Elon Musk has proven that to us. So I think that's very legit. So yes, you're not
it's
crazy.
My opinion. I'm not going to assert this as fact. It's my opinion that this guy is a Fed boy that was he had prior knowledge of this event. He made out with a 1.5 million prior to the drop in the share price, maybe even shorted some shares as well, and leveraged up, and then allowed this attack to happen with the data push. We don't know who pushed it. Will we get to the bottom of that? I don't know. And the reason why I think that this happened was because coincidentally, it's now coming out that Joe Biden slipped into a coma, that the letter that he pushed out was not his signature, was not on official letterhead. And I just got in a few hours ago.
How do we know he slipped into a coma? Where did that come from?
That's the rumor coming out from Charlie Cook and Laura Loomer, right? And what they said is that he was medvac to John Hopkins, that he's in a state that the U.S. Secret Service took over. They were going to put him into one hospital, but there was a stand down order, and so they decided that they were going to fly him to John Hopkins. I have a source within Las Vegas, one of my donors in the past. I let him know about this, and he's like, "Well, I can just talk to the police department." He got back with the text saying that yes, the details of this of Charlie Kirk's entire statement has been verified, but he doesn't know more than
by
that.
The police?
By one of the police officers that was involved in this incident.
Okay, so he's got a source that comes from the police.
Yes.
He says. And you trust this person. Okay.
I do, yeah. So that's where we're at.
Let's go back to CrowdStrike for a second. So what is happening now? Because, if what you say is true, the error is not yet fixed, and there's no announced plan to fix the error. This has to have a lot of people upset, and that are technically astute, that understand what you understand.
Right.
What is sort of the buzz right now? Aren't people, aren't technical people enraged by that position?
They are, especially the IT department, because look, with this whole cloud infrastructure where you don't have a server, right?
Yeah.
There's this trust that the servers are going to be accessible through an SSH tunnel. But in order to get that SSH tunnel, the computer has to have a minimal boot state. And right now it doesn't have a minimal boot state. It's requiring
so it can't boot itself back up.
Can't boot itself back up. It gets stuck. Someone needs to come in with a keyboard, hook it into the computer,
They need physical access to fix every computer that was affected by
every
CrowdStrike?
single computer needs physical access in order to fix it. They need to get into safe mode. They need to go to the driver files, delete them. If they've got BitLocker, they're really screwed. It's about 10 to 100 times harder to get into a BitLocked system because the BitLocker system is designed to prevent the booting of the operating system if there's any problem whatsoever. Like it locks it down. It's like, oh, our laptop got stolen, and so instead of allowing the person to sort of like hit it over and over and over again, trying to like get at that data, it basically almost acts like, a self-activating thermite reactor and sort of like locks everything down. Everything's encrypted. You can't get any access to the computer whatsoever. And so BitLocker released what was previously unknown instructions on how to disable their system so that people could get in, delete these data files, and then get back to running.
Wow. Okay, so if that's the case, then all these airlines, all these banks that were affected by CrowdStrike, my understanding is that most of them have come back online. Have they come back online because somebody got physical access to the computer?
Yes,
and
that's what's happening.
So that's the only possible way. Wow.
Yes.
And also let's go back. How much market penetration does CrowdStrike have? Are they like 90% of the market, something like that?
I don't know. I do know that they're huge. So they're like the dominant player worldwide. I don't know what their market cap is. I haven't looked into that.
Okay. Yeah. Just curious, like, is this kind of everybody? Or is it just like a third of everybody? And I don't really have a sense of that. So, okay. Wow. Okay. So you think it's sabotage. You think it was deliberate. Let's go on to another topic because I was gonna ask you about something else. And CrowdStrike, this is the first time we've really heard their name in the news. They were also the cybersecurity firm hired by the Democratic National Committee to investigate the suspected breach in their systems. And they're the ones who concluded that Russian intelligence affiliated adversaries breached the DNC network, and the intelligence agencies in the United States corroborated it, right? So, and this launched the infamous Russian collusion narrative, which we now know to be false.
Right.
So what do you think happened there? Do you think CrowdStrike was malicious there as well?
Yeah, I mean, they've had a track record of being malicious. I think that they are malicious. I think that it's like, why give these guys another trust? Like they led us down this whole Russian collusion nonsense. And now they're in the middle of this. Their security officer just did a cash out. And he was a Fed boy for 24 years. Like, it's like the dots are so close together that it's like making my conspiracy senses tingle.
Yeah. So you think so. And then what do you think of the other thing I read was that a guy named Bill Binney, who is a former NSA technical director turned whistleblower, he was skeptical of the CrowdStrike report. And my understanding of what he said was that, he looked at he somehow got access to the forensics of the DNC hack and saw the data rate, which supposedly was funneling data to Russia, and it was too fast. So even data and electricity moves at the speed of light. So it has a speed limit on it, and basically the footprint of the speed of the event was more like a thumb drive locally was connected to the machine, not being shuttled across the planet. And in fact, that would have been impossible. Are you aware of what Bill Binney said, and do you concur with?
Yeah, pretty much. It was like above a gigabyte a second or something. So it indicated that it was a thumb drive transfer. It happened like within seconds. So this whole thing that it was sent across the internet to WikiLeaks was not true. It was exfiltrated and then sent to them, perhaps on a private network. I'm not entirely sure how it got into Julian Assange's hands, but that's essentially. And they could have seen that, but they were writing a political piece to support a political party and their agenda.
Do you think CrowdStrike has political affiliations?
I mean, they got deep state operatives as their chief security officer, so I would say
so. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And let's talk about you for a second. So, what is your background, and why are you famous as the Google whistleblower for people who don't know you?
Yeah, so in 2019, I warned the public that Google was getting ready to rig the elections in 2020, a year before that whole thing, before they did it. And they were successful. They employed all kinds of tricks. 3 months after I came out, there were starting to be rumors of a disease running around through China. And then, 6 months later, we were in the midst of the pandemic. I like to call it the plandemic because it's pretty much accepted now that it was a plan. It was released from a bioweapons lab in Wuhan.
Yes, that is accepted now. That it did come from the lab. Yep.
Now, not everyone accepts it, but it's pretty much well accepted. Now, it's interesting because I kind of triggered a business model change within Project Veritas because they were doing these really expensive insider pieces where they were like doing investigative journalism, but then they were like, well, hey, is this whistleblower going to be the future of our company? And so James O'Keefe said that I was going to be the test case. I didn't know about this until later. But I'm pretty media savvy, and so I came out, blew the whistle on this Titan. James O'Keefe got a sting operation. They got Jen Janai to say that only something the size of Google could stop the next Trump situation, like in her own words. And so this created the largest story they had ever released in the history of their company. And so because of that, they pivoted. A lot of other whistleblowers saw that sort of like claim to fame, and they wanted a piece of it. And what happens? We started getting whistleblower after whistleblower, CNN, Facebook. It was just like bam, 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 bam. I thought we had it in the bag that we're going to be able to reverse all this evil. Then the whole COVID crisis hits and pretty much put a halt to all of the whistleblowing. The censorship came, incredibly fast and hard, bigger than it ever was. I mean, YouTube went from organizing the world's information and making it universally accessible and useful to censoring vitamin D as a protective element against COVID under the misinformation classification, right?
That is true.
That's what Susan Wojcicki said on CNN to what's-his-face. And so, I've witnessed the complete inversion of the entire company. And by the way, this Jen Janai that we busted in 2019, instead of firing her, Google turned around and gave her the responsibility for the entire AI alignment organization for Google Gemini, right? With all the woke intersection that they inserted into that AI model. That
so kind of a woke AI that won't,
Black Nazis, Native American women citing the Declaration of Independence. Like that was all because of this radical leftist that we busted in 2019 that Google, instead of firing, promoted her. And then they had the disastrous Gemini release. And I warned Google about this girl and they didn't pay any attention whatsoever. They just doubled down. So,
let me ask you this. So you say that Google interfered in the 2020 election, I assume electronically. How exactly do you think that they interfered?
They were controlling people's access to information. They literally rewrote all of their news algorithms on Trump stories. Like, for example, when Trump fired Comey, they basically said, oh, well, this could actually be a mega story because people keep on talking about it in the Mockingbird media. And so what they decided to do is that they're like, well, if a topic keeps on having a new story, then what we're going to do is we're going to have like a mega story. And then it acts as a force multiplier on the ranking order of that story. And so
Google, so your contention is not that Google changed election results, it's that they influenced the news. They basically acted like Pravda and propagandized the American.
And acted as cover for the deep state who was doing the real rigging. Now, if they're rigging the information that we see, is that rigging by proxy? In my opinion, yes, it is.
I agree. So,
you can't have a free and fair election if you don't have free and fair access to information.
Totally agree. Absolutely true. Okay. I want to return back to CrowdStrike for another second. So on Google, or sorry, not on Google, on X, you got community noted. And on your CrowdStrike analysis, and a guy named, I assume it's a guy, I might be wrong, but Tavis Ormandy said it's not a null pointer issue. The code is reading pointers from a table in a loop, and some are invalid. Perhaps an error parsing a configuration file left some entries uninitialized. I assume you dispute that.
Dude, he's talking about a null pointer, but with extra steps.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's what it sounds like to me, too. I have to agree.
Like, he can say whatever he wants, right? But we have the stack trace, right?
Yep.
And this stack trace right here clearly shows that the read address is 9C, right? That's the null pointer block. Like, I don't care what he has to say about reading a table of pointers. At the end of the day, it's reading 9C. That's a null pointer exception. I don't care what anybody else. And the dude works for Google, of all things. And so, there's a fight right now going on in the fact checkers where people are calling him out, saying he literally says that it's not a null pointer exception. Then his entire article tweet thread goes into actually how it is a null pointer exception. So that's my response to it. That fact check shouldn't exist. Hopefully the community will take it down because it's literally contradicting itself in its own explanation.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people don't understand the technical details enough to understand why that community note. They don't understand the community note, much less your explanation. So they don't know who's right and who's wrong, right? I think that's what's going on there. Yeah. Whereas some other things that are sort of easier for the normies to understand, that community note probably would have never made it up. I agree with you.
Yeah.
So with CrowdStrike and the current situation, would you say that it's sort of the electronic equivalent of the laughable and or suspicious incompetence of the Secret Service at the Trump rally a week ago? Is it kind of in the same ballpark?
I mean, I don't think that. Well, I probably have a different opinion on that. Trump shooting.
Okay.
I think that was. Look, I think the deep state controls both sides, and I think right now they're trying to implode Biden and the left. I've been talking about a rug pull event since 2022 as I watch sort of like what the social media companies are doing and reversing a lot of these bans. Like, look, the left had the right at knife point. They had the censorship in place. They had the vaccine mandates. All that was missing was like COVID camps for the unvaccinated, right? And for some reason, like Musk stepped in, bought Twitter, and the deep state just went, I guess we're just going to let this happen, right? So I don't believe that there's really any good guys in this system. I don't really believe that Trump is legitimate opposition. I think that this is a big, giant game, and right now they're getting ready for a huge event this election cycle. And the reason why I believe that this has to happen is because of artificial intelligence, believe it or not. Like, we are on the cusp of the fourth industrial revolution. China has been laying down exponential more power generation capabilities. And if we don't get on an equal footing on them and start like right away, like getting power down, we're going to lose the artificial intelligence arms race by the numbers. Like, run the numbers. We don't have enough energy to power the next generation of AI, and China will. And look, like, I think that the deep state isn't freaking dumb. Like, they've been at this, like, throne of the world game for thousands of years. And so I believe that they're in it to win it. And so I think that what's going to happen is that right now, all of this craziness right now is to trigger a crisis that's going to happen in this election cycle. And at the end of the day, they're basically going to have the right-wing revolutionaries win over. I think that I think we're going to see something from the left, where the left clearly tries to take a coup and try to split the country, and that they'll either succeed with Trump being president of one faction, but I do think that they're going to try to steal the election so blatantly that it's going to give the justification for a mini reset, if not a total reset of the entire system led by the right. It's not going to be a Klaus Schwab reset. It's going to be more like a revolutionary reset, which makes a lot of sense to me because we're not going to win the arms race in AI against China with solar panels and wind turbines. Okay, like that.
Well, I agree. And let me just, so some people who don't know that AI relies on energy and chipsets basically coming from Taiwan at the moment. So you need these very sort of energy intensive chips in order to build the best AI models, and which requires power. And if you are a Green New Deal kind of country that's powering down, if you will, while China is burning more coal and more oil and powering up, if you will, and nuclear at the same time, you will not have the power required to build the best AI models, and therefore your country will not have AI supremacy.
That's right.
And that, right? Okay.
And the thing about artificial intelligence is that it's got sublinear increase in the efficiencies as you double the size. So what happens is that if you double the size of the model to make it smarter, you have to put in 4 times the amount of energy. Okay, so if you want to build a model that's like 16 times larger than you had before, it's going to be 4, 16, 32. 64. Anyways, it's a quadratic. You need a quadratic amount of power, right? So that looks like, it almost looks like exponential. In fact, it is exponential. Yeah, it's an exponential. And so, in order to get AI supremacy, you need exponential more amounts of power to power this whole thing. And so, we're not going to get that with chemical energy release. We're not going to get that from coal. Now, China's putting down coal because that's going to fill in the stopgap between, where they are now and this new age of nuclear power. And I'm not just talking about uranium-235. We have exotic stuff with breeder reactors that uses 99% of the fuel capacity in the pellet and doesn't generate nuclear bombs and almost none of the waste. Which is the reason why it wasn't done in the 1960s, is because they wanted plutonium so they could make their uranium jackets for their hydrogen bombs. And also to shut down any other country trying to do nuclear, because if all you know how to do is uranium-235, then everyone that tries to go nuclear could potentially generate a nuclear bomb. If you do this fast breeder reactor, which consumes all of the nuclear material, you don't have this heavy, trans uranium, I can't remember what it's called, but you don't have all of these heavy elements that could be used. We don't have plutonium. And because of that, everyone could have safe and affordable access to clean nuclear technology. And the powers that be decide to shut that all down, make uranium-235 cycle, the slow fission reactors is the only available thing for nuclear. Anyways, China's getting rid of all that. They're putting in thorium reactors, these fast breeder reactors, which breeds uranium-233, which is very unstable, right? It's highly radioactive while it's being transmuted. But they're not going along with this. They're going to have orders of magnitude more energy. And I believe the elites are setting up right now to have a major change in our society so that they are able to justify putting all that stuff down. That means that climate change and all that nonsense is dead. It's completely antithetical to the fourth industrial revolution. It's going to get scrapped.
It would seem if you think that there is an elite that is driving for Western supremacy, they want power. Right. So why would they support Green New Deal, Klaus Schwab, WEF bullshit? Right. That would seem to be antithetical to their plans. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense when you've got an oil-based energy monopoly across the world. Right. But now that China's like, oh, this is the seat of power, this artificial intelligence. If we win the AI arms race, we're going to defeat America just by scaling up our manufacturing. Right. So they're not dumb. The Chinese are incredibly intelligent people. They see this as a way to defeat the West. And we're not going to be able to stop them unless we do a first strike. And I've thought a lot about this. Are we going to get into World War III with China? I don't think so. I think China is very advanced in their bioterrorism. I think that they've got a sanction option of their own, where if they get absolutely blown away, that they have countermeasures in place to release horrible bioterrorism that we've never seen before. And as I run through all these different scenarios, I realize that we're not going to get into World War III. Maybe we'll get into a fake war with them at the very most. But I think that what's going to happen is that we are at a mutually assured destruction, a stalemate with China, even though we are probably way more powerful than they are. It's the second strike capabilities that we have to be concerned about. And so I think that the only path forward for the elites versus China is, hey, let's both enter the fourth industrial revolution, and then we'll fight it out later on, depending on who wins out on this exponential curve.
Don't we supply a lot of the food to China? Aren't we sort of their, to use an ancient world analogy, their Egypt to their Rome, where, basically if Egypt gets fucked, Rome gets fucked, right? So isn't it sort of that relationship?
Yeah, they do have a food problem because they have a lot of people. Russia's got a lot of food. There's a lot of places, that are the bread baskets of Europe.
Yeah.
So
we're not the only option, but we're definitely one of their biggest, right?
It'll be hard. But the thing is that, look, we have advanced chemistry. There's no reason why they can't just synthesize carbohydrates. I think that's going to, we don't have fully synthetic food right now, and I'm not entirely sure why. I feel that with, some hydrocarbons and a chemical process, you could create, a suitable, it wouldn't be nutritious, but it would keep you alive.
Well, it sounds kind of horrible. It sounds like it probably doesn't. It sounds kind of Soylent Greenish, right?
Yeah, it's Soylent Greenish, but it'd basically be like starches with some trace minerals thrown in, so you don't die right away. But that would get them through World War III, and so I think that a lot of this is this is essentially the breakdown of the oil monopolies that are going on, and that oil monopolies has been enforced by a sea power, namely Britain and the United States with our Navy. And what's happening is that China and the land powers are basically saying, you know what, we don't want to distribute all of our goods and services through the sea. We want to build rails. We want to do delivery of goods through rail access, the Silk Road through Europe and whatever. And so they're building these pipelines north and south, east and west. These pipelines bypass the naval powers of Britain and the United States. And right now we're throwing a tantrum. And if you want to know what the actual the conflict is, it comes down to the sea powers versus the land powers. And the sea powers are dominant, and the land powers want to get out from underneath the thumb of the sea power, because the sea power is trying to enforce their financial system to enslave them through debt financing, the way that they're doing to pretty much all the other countries across the world.
Well, let me ask you a question. Just sort of a side note. So you said earlier you don't believe Trump is legit. You think he's
man, it's going to come back to bite me. I already know it. Yeah, that's
no. Look. We're in crazy land now. Let's go the rest of the way, right? So, you that's what you think about Trump. Do you think Elon is the same thing, or do you think Elon is legit? And how do you explain him endorsing Trump if he's not legit?
I think that,
or if he is legit.
He's 100% controlled. Yeah, 100. I mean, they're not going to let. They're not going to let Elon Musk get the most powerful social media company in the world, and not have their meat hooks into him.
So you don't trust Elon?
No, not all.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. I disagree with you on that. I do. I hope I'm right. I hope you're wrong. I do think there's some good guys out there. I don't believe in a nihilistic, no good guy world. And I think the good guys would be largely visible if they do exist. And I believe that I am seeing them. So that said, I am also sympathetic to a lot of things you're saying. Not everything, but certainly a lot of it. And I do think there's some bad people. There is a deep state, and there's some bad things afoot. I think that's sort of undeniable at this point. And I think Elon has proven that with the Twitter files. Again, one of the reasons I trust Elon is because he did reveal all that stuff. And if he was truly in league with the bad people, why would you do that? That makes no sense. So even as sort of as a feint, right? Like as a false good guy move, I just don't buy it. So anyway, I hope I'm right, and I hope you're wrong. But I hope we come out. Hope we come out of this all wiser and happier. And it may take a little bit of time, but I think we will. I'm hopeful. So, right. Zach, we're sort of coming up on the end of the hour here. So, is there any closing thoughts or anything you want to plug?
Oh, yeah. Check out my disclosure on Google at zachvorhies.com. You get to see how the sausage of censorship is made. Follow me for hot takes at twitter.com/perpetualmaniac. And check out my book, Google Leaks, an expose of big tech censorship.
Awesome. Well, Zach, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your thoughts with us. My name is Mark Jeffrey. This has been Hash Rate. We'll see you all next time.
All right.